Hello, and welcome to The Knowing Show. I am your host, Christine Marie, and I am so incredibly honored and thrilled to be joined today by best-selling author of Alive on Purpose, Gabriel Keczan, and transformational coach specifically for men. Y'all, we are diving deep into some topics that are not very often spoken about, and we're really going to be diving into just the quiet, he calls it the powder keg of pressure that so many men are kind of quietly enduring until all of a sudden they cannot hold it all together anymore. And so we really are going to just talk about the reality of some of the problems that a lot of men are facing today quietly, and bringing them to light, bringing them to the surface so that men can receive some love, honestly, and receive some care. And Gabriel, I'm so grateful you're here with us. Thank you so, so much. You have coached so many men through this very process of finding their purpose, really strengthening and repairing their relationship with themselves. And you said this in one of your videos that just made me laugh. You said, go look for where you gave your balls away and go take them back. And it's a little crass, but I love it, because there's honestly that we need to talk and be realistic about what the situation is that is recovering masculinity and bringing it back, because it has really, man, it's been through the ringer over the last couple of decades. And so I'm so grateful for the work you're doing. Thank you for joining us here on the show.
Thank you, Christine. It's just an honor to be here, and feeling excited to just dive in and see where this conversation ends up.
See where it goes. There's a million miles, a million different directions we can go. And Gabriel, really, this conversation of recovering masculinity is something that truly is so critical. It's kind of been diluted. You know, there's a lot happening today that is kind of forcing this topic that needs to be addressed. There was a study I saw the other day that boys by the age of 10 years old feel categorically unknown. This is a real issue where there's just no real teaching on how to train boys versus how to train girls. And it's all so messed up right now. And I think there's a lot of confusion. We don't necessarily need to go into the gender topic per se, but I'm really curious on your take on recovering masculinity and the work you're doing with men. What are some of the predominant issues that you're hearing from the men that you're working with?
Well, I think I primarily work with family men who are business owners. So they're at a certain stage of the game where they're already carrying a great deal of pressure and feeling the crunch. There's only so many hours in the day, and we call it sometimes the trifecta of insanity of leading a marriage, leading as a father, and leading in business and getting results in all three of those domains without losing his own embodied well-being. I call it the masculine axis of backbone, heart, and balls, because we need all three, and that requires a certain crazy wisdom, allegiance to truth-telling, and a lot of guys will tend to self-isolate. Guys will more often just go and hide behind work and, go the stoic path, which is great, important. But when you were saying the powder keg metaphor, like for me, that also has to do with covert contracts. And, we sometimes call it nice guy syndrome, but really looking at how each man seeks or finds validation, whether it's through providing or getting seen. There's always a sacrifice of one of the balls that he's juggling. But if he drops the marriage and family ball, that's a harder one to put together than the business one. So what I'm most working with is guys getting, well, I call it Alive on Purpose, but getting really clear on what they need. And let's get real here. Purpose is a word that gets thrown a lot around in corporate or in all different sectors, but it's really about intention. And at the deepest personal level, it's about God. So when we talk about a guy knowing his purpose, it's about having access to the voice of God within him, and then winning that spiritual warfare within him, so that he can rise, so that he can cover his family in prayer and provision, not only as a provider, but as the pastor in the sacred ground of the family, and keeping love alive, and keeping, how do you do that all while even keeping polarity healthy within the man woman equation. And so I'm just sort of speaking recklessly into the field here.
Good.
But that's, I think, more than anything, there's a saying, like, we're all liars. And anyone who denies that they're a liar is the biggest liar in the room. And when I say that, what I actually mean is there's always a deeper level of truth that we've had to sacrifice in order to carry on, or to carry the burden. And there comes a season in every man's life where he has to take off the mask and dig deeper into the fire, dig deeper into the embers, and find a new source of fire within him. Or else, that's when things can go sideways. So yeah, I mean, unlocking biblical wisdom, and one of the ways that the masculine loves is through correction, and we find that through brotherhood, is through listening to another man where he's lying to himself. That's the hardest place to hear it, where I'm lying to myself. So then, with the right men's coach or men's group, you're going to get a cross check of truth and say, yeah, well, I hear you're saying all the right words, but I don't believe you. Like, it's the difference between lukewarm, good, and on fire, great. And as we know, good and great are enemies. And the real, like, fuel for 10x results is not even good or great, but it's obsessiveness. So how do you steward that drive, that obsessive quality to be the best, but also to bless, right? There's a time to roar, and there's a time to repair. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of speaking into it here. But that's some of what I'm seeing right now.
I love it. You said a number of different things that are really, really good pathways for us to go down. I want to talk about the dichotomy of the two. So often it's, I have to be one or the other, and we view the world through a very binary black and white lens. And you even said lukewarm. So if we want to be great, if we want to have kind of that ability to be obsessive, and you said there's a big difference between when it's time for roaring, when it's time for repair. I think of it, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. I think of it as the ability to kind of balance the left brain and right brain, the masculine and feminine. Those two are kind of categorized within one human being as both of those. How do you approach so often kind of that binary approach that is so often in men looking at it, whereas I am a man and this is what, I put, say in parentheses, this is what, or quotation marks, this is what masculinity is?
What comes to mind is a lot of Jordan Peterson's talk on darkness and, your inner monster, because, when a man becomes a walking powder keg, that's dangerous to himself and his family. It's because he hasn't dealt with that darkness. Yeah. And so for me, martial arts always finds me when I'm not even looking for it, and it'll just come to me by an invitation. It happened years ago in my 20s playing capoeira and training, but in recent years it's been jiu-jitsu that just sort of, I met a guy who was like, hey, I'm looking for a grappling partner, and he kind of looked me up and down, and I was like, I'll grapple with you. Like, we were at an event, and I didn't even know what he was talking about, but he was creating a home dojo because he wanted to train. And
wow.
So he's been my jiu-jitsu coach for almost 3 years now. And we have a small private dojo. And that's the place where I get to, kind of wring out all the darkness through the primal and just really find this show is called The Knowing Show, but there's a level of knowing that comes in that level of training or fitness that is bone marrow level. Like, it's a level of knowing that's in the heart, in the blood, and in the bones. And I can't access it conceptually. I can't access it by scrolling my news feed or overthinking. I need to
Yes.
get gritty and grind and unlock it. Because when the body breaks open or breaks down, that's when we get the breakthroughs. Like I've had so many epiphanies and personal insights on the mat.
Yes.
Anyhow, that's where I'm coming from, because your body is ultimately your first business, and your actual business and bank account are only going to thrive to the degree to which this is taken care of, because this is your OS, right? This is where it begins. And so
Right.
often we'll just sacrifice that if they start to play that martyr card and want to do everything for the family and keep the wife happy. But that is what actually makes him the most untrustworthy man. We call that nice guy syndrome. And you talked about going into the ashes. For me, it was my first marriage, which ended in divorce, because I was a classic nice guy, putting my wife on a pedestal, just wanting to make her happy. And the truth was, that was the most untrustworthy version of myself, because I wasn't honoring this first business of God
Chills.
and marriage and family, and then community. So there's kind of some biblical ordering principles that I'm more comfortable teaching and training on, that slowly crept into my coaching practice over years. And now I'm not ashamed of leading with it, because this is what the world needs. This is what men need. Men need cross checks of truth and brotherhood, and to be their brother's keeper in all these ways.
So good. So effectively, the way that you say that, you said three things earlier, just absolutely necessary. You said backbone, heart, and balls. Those three are what are required of a man to really walk in full masculinity. And the kind of like the bone marrow, like the cellular level, the activation of the physical. On the show, I talk about our four intelligences: our emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and physical intelligence. Our body has so much energy and so much data that it stores. There's a book called The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk, who actually was one of the first psychotherapists and psychologists to actually coin PTSD. And it was all in studying how these war veterans were carrying physical trauma in their body. So as you're talking, Gabriel, I'm just realizing, like, working out for men. I heard a woman the other day say something. She was like, man, it's so frustrating. Like, my husband goes to the gym, goes to work, comes home, and I'm lucky if I just barely get a workout in, 15, 20 minutes, and he gets an hour. I think, though, there's something about having that physical release on the testosterone level, specifically in men. What are your thoughts on that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, I mean, 100%. Like, if I don't show up for my physical discipline, then it really affects the mood. And the married game is all about emotions, right? I like to say our wives don't hear the words we say, they hear the tone that we're speaking in.
Yes.
And I'm, like I say, I'm a player coach. I'm in the game, and I make all the mistakes, and that's why I know this stuff. But so yeah, like doing the fitness and physical really balances moods and allows me to be more emotionally present with my kids, more able to connect deeper and to drop into surrender. And I think one of the superpowers is also transitioning, because we have a multiplicity of self, right? There's the self who's rolling on the mats, and there's self who's taking care of toddlers or raising teenagers, whatever stage of the game it is. And for guys, I think one of the major disciplines is the transitions, is to go from one mode to the other, to code switch between the one getting results at work, whether it's whatever that looks like, and then be able to go, a softer version, a parenting version, a husbanding version.
Wow.
So I think transitions are a big part of it. And then gamifying those different domains is part of how I coach men, so that they're self-reflecting on the core four: the body, the being, the balance, the business, and looking at where they're winning every day. Because we can't build a lopsided, ship that's going to crash. We need to build our worlds with that sense of integrity and that sense of, like, wholeness. And wholeness is the whole mess.
Mm. Isn't that the truth? I love it. You said the core four, which is, you said being, body, business, and what was the last one?
And balance refers to usually wife and kids, but it's whatever partners, like it's the relational domain.
Right, right. Good. Good. I want to talk more about transition because, my earlier question was effectively, how do we allow for the roar and the repair and knowing how to play into those? And you talked a lot about the body and the physical release. And it's almost like in the physical release, in roaring in some ways, in that physical letting it out on the mat, go into town, you actually then can tap into that softer side. So can you talk a little bit more about the transition? So the physical body, obviously, so that's one of the core four, is the body, making sure that you're actually getting the physical release there. Let's move to the next one on the business. So for people who are doing that transition from business to balance and then business to being, like, what does transition look like? I'm seeing a quadrant of sorts of like each one of these, and it's like, okay, this is how we get healthy in the body, which is physical release. And then we move to business. How do we get healthy in business? And then we'll talk about transitions next. So let's talk about, what does it look like to be healthy in each regard from how you're coaching folks?
Well, I mean, business is different, depending on what sector you're in or what your work is.
Absolutely.
But there's a kind of go-to framework is to discover and declare. Like, tune in to what does the business need today? That's a discovery process. And it's crazy making in itself. If we get lost in, sorry, I got a call coming in. And then there's declare. Like, what is the revelation? What is it you need to do? And then declaring it as happening, commanding it into existence, speaking it. The business is, whether it's marketing or fulfillment, problem to solve, or sales, whatever side of the game, it's those are some metrics, right? And obviously it depends on the sector, and there's whole other frameworks for business that I guide clients through, because when you unlock something on the personal level, the cascade effect is that there ends up being results in every domain. And power cascades through all the domains. So you show up with more confidence because of whatever, health maybe, and then you're going to be communicating better within your marriage and leading better and winning in that courtship that's supposed to never end. And then you can translate that confidence into business and that decisiveness into what actions you need to take, what leveraged action are going to get the results.
Right. I'm almost wondering, like, if you were to do you mentioned hierarchy earlier and like prioritization, because when I think of, okay, how do I need to, let's look at those quadrants again. Being really probably, maybe being comes after body, because body comes first and then being, which would be more so like the inner self and alignment there, that then transcends down into the other areas of almost like the external world.
Yeah, I mean, you can layer these or fit them together any way that it makes sense. Maybe even being's the innermost. If we were like concentric circles, sometimes the greatest revelations and moments of epiphany for me come at the gym when I'm sweating. I'm like, or it comes when I'm doing the dishes or I'm vacuuming. It's like it's usually in the in between times for me. It's never when I'm staring at a blank screen or that's never when you. So I'm sorry, I keep getting someone trying to call me.
Oh no. Hopefully it's none of your clients who are
in. Yeah, so I don't know. I think that's part of the game. And of course, every one of us will have different strengths and weaknesses. Some guys are crushing it in business, but at the expense of their marriage. They're in a sexless marriage, or they're in a unhappy marriage, or they're not showing up, for the kids the way they want to. So there's all sorts of ways that we can also look at the core four, not only as a gamified model of like building, but also as a diagnosing tool to see, like,
Mm,
some guys may be completely neglecting their health, but they have created a whole bunch of capital in their business, right? And so there's a reorienting that may need to happen for that man that may be completely opposite to the guy who's crushing it at work, but he hasn't got, or he's crushing it in the gym, but he has no results, in other domains.
right.
So that's why the game, we could call it the trifectas of insanity,
Yeah.
because at this stage of the game, a lot of guys feel like they're being pulled in many directions. And how
Right.
do you build the kingdom with principles and warrior frameworks that work? Well, that's the game, and
Mhm.
the business of that I'm in.
Yeah, it is. I like that you say gamified because it really is. It's like, what are the rules of the games? What's the boundaries? What are the goals? And how do we analyze every single one of those areas of life? Because Gabriel, I think men and women, but specifically the men that I've been talking to recently, there's just a sense of overwhelm. Like, I cannot do it all. Like, this is just feeling impossible. Um, and so
Yes.
when you yeah, so talk about that a little bit. Like, how are you actually so being in your body and really
Yeah.
letting the guys have a physical release, that's so important. Do not sacrifice yourself on the altar of everyone else. You said that that was kind of your wake-up call back when you had your divorce, was realizing that you had lived that way for so long. So one, that's number one. When it comes to being, you mentioned that these kind of in between moments are times that you'll have these kind of like divine revelations and coming from within. You're like, oh my gosh, this is it. So talking about these quadrants or concentric circles, physical release. Everyone needs to be doing that. The being, paying attention, and would you even say like elimination of inputs during those in between moments? Like, don't constantly be filling your mind with external noise so that you even have the space to have those revelations to begin with.
Absolutely. Yeah. And guarding your heart, and really disciplining your time and attention, because those are the assets. That's the capital that each of us has. Like, the kind of common saying is, everyone has the same 24 hours in a day.
Yeah.
Why do some people get massive results and others don't? It's a matter of leverage. But you said a word there I want to come back to, which was impossible. When it feels
Mm,
impossible, and one of the ways I like to reframe overwhelm is as a sign that there's old systems leaving my system,
oh,
because they're outdated and there's a
yeah.
greater possibility emerging. And in order, we have a phrase, and it's called the impossible game. And it's a way of looking at our targets and our growth targets, either in business or personal, where in order to hit that target, it literally feels impossible to the man I am right now.
Mm,
Whether it's raising your rates, or being the guy who can lift 200 pounds, or
yes.
whatever it is. Like, you literally have to die to the old self and sort of set that impossible goal. We call it a game so that it's gamified, and then it doesn't have to be this big looming sense of
Yeah.
failure that I'm not there yet and I've been working for
Yes.
some. But it's gamifying it. It just creates a levity of, like, an approach to it
Mm, yeah.
that brings levity. But the important thing is that you believe you can reach the impossible game, but you're not going to be the same man when you hit that, or the same woman, or the same couple. What's that quote by Esther Perel, the therapist? She says, most of us in our adult lives have 2 to 3 romantic
Yeah.
relationships over the course of our life. If we're lucky, they're with the same person.
Yes.
So with that, I mean, because a lot of guys come to me when the marriage isn't working, and that's really, we do some marriage whispering, right, in the work. But in order for that man to resurrect his marriage from the brink of divorce, that man needs to die to who he was, and so does his wife. And in a way, they have to put their old marriage in the fire. And that whole marriage just has to be let go of in order for them to build their next level of success, of surrender, of fulfillment, whatever that looks like. Show up for it and to live it and to fulfill it. And it's usually more of a process of subtraction. That's the paradox to get to the impossible game targets, is we often have to do less. One of the authors I geek out on is Ben Hardy, and his X is easier than 2X. And his future self models, because they really pivot all of psychology away from being something about the past and the issues and the tissues and trauma and all that, because that can become a swampland, a pit where we just get lost. And these future focused movements also speak to men way better. And that's why therapy doesn't work for a lot of guys, because it's too passive and it's too focused on the past. Guys want to get results. We want to leverage results, but we also need someone to cross-check us with the truth where we're lying to ourselves. So anyway, I just wanted to riff on the theme of impossibility and leadership.
That's huge. And I want to take a sidebar from this whole conversation around the, those 4 aspects of what we kind of need to bring back into health for men specifically, and talk about this dynamic of women focusing on the past and men wanting to focus on the future. What is one takeaway for couples in regards to reconciling that difference? I think that is incredibly profound, Gabriel. It's like, look at what's happened, and men are like, yeah, but what are we going to do to change it? And frankly, I've seen it go both ways, right? Like, one person is more future oriented, one person is more hung up on the past. What is one thing, one real action that a couple can take in that moment of conflict when one is oriented on the past, one's oriented on the future?
Well, my parents were married for 50 years, and the secret to their marriage was we listen to each other. That's it. And sometimes when we're not in the best moment, that's the hardest thing to do with a couple. So that's really part of it. But also, I think there's a difference between emotional needs to be heard and faith, and really connecting with God's presence inside of those storms and those stormy moments. And it's true for husbands and wives just as much as it's true when you're parenting and the kids are going through it. And we get always the choice to either get drawn into the storm, and then it goes one way, or we can stay anchored in a presence that is peaceful. And that's the voice of God within that becomes the lighthouse in the storm that says, oh, this is what's happening. I'm not going to deny that there's a lot of intensity right now, but let's simplify. Let's be present. And when you bring that quality of attention into the moments like that, it can really create the container, right? Create the containment that diffuses it. And usually people want to be seen, people want to be heard, but at the deepest level of attachment, we want to feel felt.
Yeah.
And when, like, are you feeling me on that? Then there's the kind of catharsis of like, okay, well, I was felt, and now I can be present with God and the vision of the future and where we're going. Like, so there's always a titration between that, I think, with the feelings and the facts. That's part of it, is how do we be with both?
So good. I mean, really bringing ourselves to be grounded in the present moment, and presence. I mean, I love that aspect of like connected to God, who's in every single one of us, and allowing for that presence to really illuminate by being present ourselves. And then I just have never thought of this concept of our own ability to be present, thus allows for us to connect with God within us. And then therefore he can be activated, like Christ within. But if we are not present, we're either in the past or the future, and God is here. God is now.
Yeah.
So I love that concept. I've never thought about it that way. So thank you. That's so good. So if or both of us are in different time zones, one of us is in the past, one of us is in the future. It's coming and meeting in the now. It's so
Yeah,
good.
it's a presence and attunement. One of my mentors as a therapist, she'd always come back to presence and attunement. That's the game.
Mm-hmm.
What are you noticing now? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, what about now? What are you noticing? Like, just
Yes.
continually coming back into the moment is the work, right?
Yes. Yeah, and it's so hard. I'm remembering actually the gentleman I started seeing, he kept reinforcing this for us. He said, lead with I feel, because I feel brings me into now in
Right.
this moment. And also, you said facts and feelings. That's something else that's incredibly dangerous, because if we're in the feelings sans facts, and frankly sans God, we're not going to be aligned with truth, because just because I'm feeling this way does not mean that it's actually truth. And it's an element of the reality of our experience, but it's
Yeah.
not the total picture. I have this thought, I charted out my eulogy when I turned 30, and then I turned it into present day, present tense, and kind of first person. So rather than Christene was, it's I am. And I love reading this eulogy. And I had this thought the other day. I was like, man, I want to, and I now I call it my ideal. And I realized the other day, I was like, man, I'd actually like to create one for this man that I'm seeing and for those closest to me and my family, because sometimes we do forget what's true. And both can be true. They can be so wonderful and also be having a bad day. Yet both are, that is a greater fact, that is a greater truth, because it's their core of who they are, especially when there's the activation in the present moment that is peace surrounding us, almost like as a shield in this present moment as we're looking
Absolutely.
ahead to the future. So thank you for saying that. Any comments before we go back to the
Well,
initial conversation?
I I like to call when we do get triggered with our deepest, like, let's call them soul wounds. This is
Yeah.
when our wives and husbands become our greatest witnesses, because they see the most intimate parts of us that are unfinished, that are raw, that are ugly, and that are immature and that are wounded. So when my um, triggers come up and my wife's triggers come up, if they overlap, then they create a vortex. And that vortex I call it the trauma vortex. And it has a downward direction that leads to just chaos. And that's when couples will just be in a dysregulated conflict. And that's when nothing makes sense. And then it starts to get personal, or they start to say things they don't mean. And it's lacking forgiveness. So the remedy is to create a counter vortex, a healing vortex. And I like to
Mm.
say the best foundation for marriage is forgiveness. And there's this story that really landed for me when I was listening to a woman speak about when her marriage with her husband actually began. And she said it didn't begin the day that they exchanged vows. That's what most people think is when it begins. It happened
Right.
years later when she woke up and looked at him and she hated him.
Wow, I just got chills. Oh gosh.
Because we're human, right? Like
Oh,
there's sides that are
wow.
exposed in the initiatory fire of marriage. And so
Yeah.
marriage is for them to work, and maybe why there's a crisis of masculinity and men and women is because of these ancient principles of how things could work. Um,
Yeah.
and I've had those moments with my wife too. And like I say, I'm the player coach, where she looked at me and maybe said things that she wouldn't say again. And I
Yeah.
stood in the fire, and I stayed in the peace. And that was the victory. Because right after I heard that story, I had that conflict in my own marriage, and I stood my ground
Mhm.
without reacting. And that's when you're making progress, is when the time between rupture and repair in the conflict cycle in the relationship is actually shrinking. and it's getting easier. That's when you know that you're winning. The practice is getting stronger. You're building a stronger foundation together of love and togetherness and like functionality.
And you said rupture and repair, the time diminishing between those two. You also mentioned reaction. I really love what it was so quick what you just said, but effectively it was like you just listened and didn't react, to use the wisdom from your parents' 50-year marriage of truly listening. Man, that's so hard to do, to withhold reaction, truly listen to their experience, ensure you understand. You mentioned Jordan Peterson earlier in his infamous debate with Sam Altman. Was that who it was? Sam Harris. That's what it was. When they resumed their 3-hour debate from the previous day, they restated each other's opinions and arguments. And they could not proceed to the next 3-hour round of debate until the other could agree, yes, you perfectly understand me. And I think that that's such a good framework for couples. In fact, there was a moment that I had a rupture with the man I'm seeing, and I took a moment and I said, okay, I'm going to repeat back to you exactly what I hear you saying. And I did, and the second he heard it, he was like, yeah, that's right. And I was like, okay, now we can proceed, because we now, at least we're in the same ring. Sometimes I'm in one ring and they're in another ring, and we're contending against ourselves, and we don't even realize it, because truly I'm using words that hold a different definition for me than he is. Definitions of words and the integrity of them are so important. So I love that you said you withheld reaction, and I wanted to double click on that, because that was so good. Thank you. You also said a healing vortex. We know what our trigger vortexes are. So let's talk about what a healing vortex is. Can you kind of explain that a bit more?
Well, I mean, it's whatever you do together to enjoy each other. And that's why with the men I coach, we install a date your wife protocol, which is non-negotiable, once a week date, where the guy leads it, he books it, he plans it, and the agenda is just to enjoy each other. And it's different than the weekly like household meeting of bills and householding duties. It's just to enjoy each other. And that's how you should never really stop courting your spouse. Never stop dating after marriage, dating your partner. And yeah, so that's part of it. And as guys, a lot of us didn't have fathers who modeled the full whole dimensional man that we were talking about, with all those core 4 domains. So one of the journeys I guide men through that is maybe a little unusual even in men's coaching, because my background is with the therapeutic deep time training, is father work. And it's helping a man look at his relationship with his dad and what imprints were there and what might be between him and his dad that have shaped who he is. And I call it gold and garbage, because most of us inherit a certain amount of gold from our fathers, but we also get garbage, like stuff that we'd rather not carry forward, or that isn't ours to carry, or through whether it was absence or presence. The real sword work is teasing apart the gold and the garbage, so you can carry on and lead your legacy as a family man in the way that you want to, with new blueprints and new levels, turning burdens into bridges to blessings. And that's deep stuff. And it's always the deepest of the deep end with the clients I work with, because that's, when I had a guy on the phone earlier this week, and I checked in with him about the first phase of the father work journey, and he just went completely silent. And he was like, yeah, it was emotional, and he couldn't even talk. It was almost a minute. I said, take your time. You don't need to fill the call with words right now. Just feel what you're feeling. And you want to get a room full of men real quickly. is you get them all to introduce each other to their father and talk about who their dads were, and how emotional and different that is for every guy, but always
Yes.
deep and real,
Yeah.
like bone level real.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Gabriel, I've got so many more questions for you. Can we do a part two?
Yes.
I would love that. There's so much here that you said. While you said, I said, we all know what our trigger vortex is, and you were talking about a healing vortex and how it's really just about taking time to enjoy your partner. I had a thought based on a video of yours actually that I watched in advance of our conversation. You said, "Yet is your relationship with yourself on the rocks." And I thought that that was so critical because before we can really ever tend to the external relationships outside of us, we have to tend to our own. And the question I want to leave folks here with, and then I'd love to hear your question so we can give a 2-for-1 deal. My question for folks before we jump off is, do you actually enjoy being with yourself? Do you take yourself on a mini date, even if it's 5 a.m. every morning for half an hour, just you, and getting aligned and activating God within so that you're leading forth from a place, I call it vertical alignment, like under the hierarchy of God at the head, your own ideal, and then aligning everything, your mindsets, your behaviors, your beliefs under that hierarchical structure. Do you actually enjoy yourself? And it was funny, a couple weeks ago I just found myself looking external for joy. And y'all, we are our greatest. We're the creators. We have the ability to bring every sense of fulfillment and joy. Now, granted, I do believe we're created for community, yet there is something so critical if we are not able to reach from within, from our own well, and then give from that place for our partner. Man, they can always tell if we're giving to receive or if we're giving freely. So that's my question. Are you able to enjoy yourself? What's your question, Gabriel?
I love that. First of all, the question I've been asking my people this week is simply, how's your heart?
How's your heart?
Yeah.
I love it.
It's almost like so there's mythic dimension to that question. But when you're talking about being with yourself and also the need for community and connection,
Yeah.
it reminded me of a Carl Jung quote that came to mind. He said at one point, we come to community for warmth, but we go to be with ourself for light. And I could never unsee that. I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Oh my gosh.
Because often the self can get dark, and the real, like, this level of training is like to find the light at night, to light the spark in the dark, and to start a fire when everything's wet and cold and dark. And that's where the light comes from. And then, with others, we're like, hey, we're going to be together. And most guys will self-isolate. And that's part of nice guy syndrome, is not having a brotherhood, not having a male edge to sharpen your sword on. Because we're going to ask different questions. We're going to listen differently to the primal. And of course, women need that too, right? They need their red tent, etc.
Yeah. Gabriel, thank you so much for your time. How can people learn more about you?
I guess my book is on Amazon, called Alive on Purpose, and
best-selling.
Yeah, and it's for men, but anyone can pick up a copy. And I also have a YouTube channel with this, which is under my name, and then I'm most active on Facebook as a platform, but also LinkedIn and Instagram too. So those are places people could find me. I post on Substack now. I'm doing a lot of writing these days.
I saw that. Good for you. Good for you. Well, Gabriel, thank you so much for your time, my friend. I'm excited. We'll go ahead and schedule part 2 once we hop off. But thank you for your wisdom today. I'm excited to continue the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Y'all, I will see